women who have abortions. Actually, it's pretty easy to write this off as just sheer stupidity.
It's 5:04, and usually we don't get time, but we have all sorts of thoughts building up all the time on aspects of the zeitgeist from listeners. And I thought we just might canvass some before we leave today. We talked about walking and camping being named as top New Zealand sports now. A sad indictment, says a texter, is that most of the walking is done in malls, and the biggest leisure activity in New Zealand is shopping at malls. Do you reckon there's some truth to that from your observations? Someone else says there are only 3 true sports: mountaineering, motor racing and bullfighting, and the rest are merely pastimes, which I think Hemingway said.
Why do people have so much against malls? Malls are fine. I mean, they're not for everyone, but they're for a lot of people. And if you're going for a nice big stroll around a mall, good on you, I reckon.
It's nice and dry and warm.
Yeah, it's lovely in a mall sometimes.
Companionable.
Yeah, not lots
I'm
of
more
bright
concerned,
lights.
where did gardening come on this list? That's what I want to know.
Is gardening a sport?
Damn straight.
The big pumpkins?
What difference is there between sort of, shooting a rabbit or, a pheasant? Does that count as a sport still? To sort of squashing snails. That's just as, adrenaline driven.
Well, can I ask you more about this? Because competitive bird watching is apparently a sport, according to a listener, Michael Zabo, because it involves physical exertion, and there's even a New Zealand league table for competitive bird watching on ebird.org. And that's fascinating, because what should the criterion be?
Does watching sport count as a sport or only playing sport?
Watching sport can't count as a sport, can it?
It must do, though, if rugby's the most popular thing in the country. Do you know what I mean? If rugby's the most popular sport, or used to be, it can't be that everybody's playing rugby. It must be that most people just consider that the watching of rugby equals a sport.
I guess it's the fan versus participant kind of matrix.
But you get the same highs and lows, don't you? You get that runner's high from watching a good game of sport where your team is on the edge and then loses at the last minute. I think it counts as sport.
All right, if you say so. So is there World Competitive Gardening Championships?
I'm sure there is somewhere. I don't think so.
Regarding the proposed new harbour stadium for Auckland, Rex Knight makes a point, which is what the Auckland Blues want, as you may have heard.
I mean, they're so popular, they should definitely get to choose where the next stadium goes, because they get sometimes as many as 6,000 or 7,000 people along to their games.
Rex says, as the late Jock Hobbs said when asked why New Zealanders weren't able to watch the All Blacks free-to-air on TV anymore, this is the professional era, get used to it. And I say, says Rex, that cuts both ways. We taxpayers and ratepayers have already paid them scores of millions of dollars to upgrade and build and rebuild stadiums for football. So Jock Hobbs's answer then applies to the Blues' wish for a new venue. Super Rugby, get used to it, build your own. You're a huge and growing commercial business. No way should any tax or rates money be spent on Rugby Inc., which is slightly unfair because it's also be used for League Inc. and maybe Football Inc. But do you agree with the general sympathies there?
I do think that we have poured an immense amount of money into this vast collection of redundant stadia in Auckland. It would be cool if there was one that was really good and fit for purpose, but unfortunately for various reasons that's not how we've done it. But in general, Hayden East wrote a piece for the Spin-Off Blatant Plug that made a very convincing case that we should absolutely not put a stadium on the waterfront, and that turned me around. I like the idea of it in a way. I'd love walking from my office in Britomart to go and see the Breakers at Victor, but in general, there's a lot of big empty space, and that for the kind of 95+% of time that a stadium's not in use, that really there are better things we need to do with our downtown personally.
Is that something you agree with, Linda?
I can't think of any way to get gardening into this, so I'm afraid I'll pass.
Thank you both for being on the panel today. One more quick thing. The decline of letters and the decline of New Zealand Post. From Maggie of Wellington. The disappearance of letters will see handwriting vanish, and thus an important communication on a personal level. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I'm an ex-postie and I'm vaguely nostalgic about it. And Jesse Mulligan had a lovely handwritten letter, but it's fine. Yeah, young people don't know how to write, don't know how to handwrite, and I think it's okay.
And the world moves on. Duncan Grieve, Linda Hallinan, thank you both very much, and John Campbell's Checkpoint follows.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell on behalf of the Checkpoint team. Thank you for joining us tonight. Breaking news as we go to air. 180 jobs to go at Fisher & Paykel as the company closes its East Tamaki factory. We will be on to that live straight after the news. Helen Clark talks to us tonight about going for the top job at the UN, Panama, tax, and New Zealand. A New Zealand detainee dies in custody in Australia. What happened there? And water, the TPP and Donald Trump. A really busy program. All of that and more in the next 90 minutes. But first, here as always is Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. More than 180 jobs will be lost after Fisher & Paykel this afternoon announced it's closing its East Tamaki factory. The announcement was made in the last half an hour after staff were briefed. The company's managing director, Stuart Broadhurst, says the factory is no longer sustainable due to a lack of scale and cost competitiveness. He says it's a sad day for Fisher & Paykel and the staff. The manufacture of consumer whiteware and refrigeration products will be done in Thailand and China. The Air2 Union National Secretary, Bill Newson, says the job losses are a major blow to the local community, and he says nothing could be done to save the jobs. The former Prime Minister, Helen Clark, is expecting a wide open but intense contest to become the next Secretary-General of the United Nations. Ms Clark is one of 8 candidates vying to replace Ban Ki-moon when he steps down this year. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
Helen Clark's nomination comes nearly a week before candidates are scheduled for their first set of interviews with the UN General Assembly. The 66-year-old will be up against 6 candidates from the Balkans, including Moldova's former Foreign Minister and diplomat Natalia German. Ms Clark says her priorities include making sure the UN's efforts on peace and security are relevant to the times. Helen Clark is seen as the favoured candidate of Britain, France and the United States, but there is a push for a candidate from Eastern Europe. Ms Clark expects more nominees to be put forward in the coming days. From Parliament, Demelza Leslie.
The group of investigative journalists that obtained more than 11 million documents from law firm Mossack Fonseca says it will release the full list of companies and people linked to them next month. The papers show how the Panama-based law firm has used tax havens to enable its clients to launder money, hide wealth and avoid tax. The president of Panama, Juan Carlos Varela, says his country is willing to contribute to any investigation in any country relating to the documents. He says his government has zero tolerance for illicit financial activities.
The publications are related to one law company. They don't refer to the country and don't refer to other companies. Panama is willing to cooperate with any investigation that the publication of these documents can generate. We are an open country.
Panama President Juan Carlos Varela. The Prime Minister has been told he needs to strengthen the rules for New Zealand's foreign trusts. The so-called Panama Papers include tax havens in New Zealand. The New Zealand First Leader, Winston Peters, says specialist law firms and foreign trust providers advise clients there's no need for disclosure of identity in New Zealand and no chance of their trust being audited. Mr Peters says New Zealand is gaining an international reputation as a tax haven and the government needs to act to end the secrecy surrounding foreign trusts. The Prime Minister says people shouldn't jump to conclusions about how a New Zealand man died in an Australian detention centre. Australian Immigration has confirmed the death occurred at the Villawood Detention Centre in Sydney overnight. The detainee advocacy group Iwi and Oz have confirmed the man was Rob Pehopa. A detainee at the centre says Mr Pehopa collapsed from a heart attack just after midnight. But the Labour MP Kelvin Davis says he understands there was also some kind of fight just beforehand. John Key says the death has been referred to the New South Wales coroner.
While I don't have a huge amount of information, I just caution people about jumping to conclusions about what caused the death. Certainly some of the claims that I've seen don't tally with the information I have at the moment, but the only way we can really get to the bottom of it is when we fully get the report back from the coroner.
John Key says he doesn't have any reports on current conditions at the detention centre. Serco, which runs the centre, says there was no altercation. In sport, the Highlanders have suffered a setback in their quest to win back-to-back Super Rugby titles, with prop Brendan Edmonds ruled out for the rest of the season with a knee injury. Edmonds ruptured his ligaments in his left knee in his side's win over the Western Force at the weekend and will require reconstructive surgery. Meanwhile, New Zealand Rugby will implement a number of law changes in this year's provincial competitions. The Heartland Championship will trial laws relating to the tackle and breakdown areas as well as a new point system. Tries will be worth 6 points, penalty tries 8 points with no conversions, and 2-point penalties, drop goals and conversions. The national provincial competition won't trial the new point system, but will adopt the changes to the tackle and breakdown rulings. The two-time major golf champion Lydia Ko says she's excited to be going to Augusta this week. Ko will take in the US Masters week for the first time as she receives her Player of the Year award. The 18-year-old New Zealander has a busy schedule, including playing the Par 3 tournament. However, she's more interested in seeing the men in action.
No, I haven't had that many opportunities to watch the men play, so I'm really looking forward to, meeting some of the guys. And I haven't met Jordan Spieth, so I would love to meet him too. And I've only heard great things about him, so I'm really looking forward to that and just being in that Masters vibe.
Lydia Ko, and that's the news.
Hundreds of nervous athletes.
Typically where there's publicity involving an athlete of this kind of stature, then you would expect people to sit up and take notice.
Thousands evacuated.
First it was dry weather, and then hurricane, and then this one, rain.
Millions in tax havens.
It undermines our reputation. We used to have the reputation of clean transactions, a good healthy place to do business. This is not something that's good for New Zealand.
News that counts. Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the Chief Ombudsman Peter Boshier on why he's making substantial changes to the way complaints are dealt with. And after 10, the former video game addict turned designer who's all about making gaming more ethical. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather now through to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, mostly fine. Isolated showers in the east, clearing overnight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers gradually easing tomorrow and clearing in the evening. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Also Wairarapa, Nelson and Marlborough. Fine weather, isolated afternoon showers about the ranges of Nelson and Marlborough today. Bulla and Westland fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow and drizzle developing later. Fiordland and Stewart Island, scattered showers turning to rain tomorrow evening with heavy falls possible. Canterbury, Otago and Southland fine with high cloud, and the Chatham Islands cloudy periods with isolated showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. It's coming up to 5:08.
Thanks very much indeed, Katrina. We're going to talk to Helen Clark in a moment, but as you heard in the news, more than 180 jobs will be lost after Fisher & Paykel announced it's closing its East Tamaki factory, that's in Auckland. The company's managing director, Stuart Broadhurst, says the factory is no longer sustainable due to a lack of scale and cost competitiveness. The manufacture of consumer whiteware and refrigeration products will be done in Thailand and China. We're trying to talk to the company about this, but the Air2 National Secretary, Bill Newson, says it's a major blow. Obviously, Bill joins us on the phone now. You there, Bill?
Yes, hi, good evening.
Hi, 180 jobs in a community like East Tamaki. It's bad news, isn't it?
This is a fairly grim day, I'd have to say, for those workers and their families.
You say in your media statement, we've been working with the company for 8 years. They were down to a 4-day week. You've tried everything you can, really, to keep that place open, haven't you?
Yeah, I think even the company would acknowledge what the workforce and the unions have done there to try and work with them to keep these jobs, and to avoid today's announcement. I might say that the company has provided fairly comprehensive reasoning. There has been a decline in production volumes. But from a union perspective, the writing's been on the wall since the location of production into Thailand some years ago.
So, Bill, you say comprehensive reasoning. Is it persuasive reasoning? Do you understand why the company has taken this decision?
Yeah, look, they've been fairly open with their information to their staff, to give them credit, and it's a mixture of just pure decline in the volume there related to the market. It's a relation to the scale they get, that they can leverage off the economies of scale they get with hire and their production coming out of China. and it's a mixture of, frankly, being able to get it done in low-wage economies like Thailand.
Okay, so manufacturing jobs, boy, there aren't many of them lying around, are there? So what happens to these 180 workers? A lot of these workers, we should point out, are highly skilled and have been with Fisher & Paykel for years. What happens to them, Bill?
Yeah, well, can I say there are many husband and wife couples who have worked in these jobs for some years, so there's some real stress on these families this evening. These are high-value manufacturing jobs for working people who support their families. And while the jobs are being created, they are predominantly low-paid, casual part-time jobs. So it's these high-value jobs that are disappearing, John, and we're very concerned about that. And we believe the government really needs to step up. We've been saying this for some time, and lead a government-led strategy for, high-value jobs. We accept the same jobs aren't going to exist forever, but we have to have alternative jobs to lead into, and we have to have a strategy for those jobs. And we're entitled, given today's news, to reflect that we've just spent $26 million on a flag debate. We should have been investing that sort of money in a jobs debate.
Bill Newson, Air 2 National Secretary, thanks so much for joining us, Bill. And as I said, we are trying to talk to Fisher & Paykel about this announcement, which came out at 4:30 this afternoon. Let's turn now to the news that Helen Clark is to run for the top job at the UN. Very big news today. 8 individuals have held the position of UN Secretary General. They've come from Norway, Sweden, Burma, Austria, Peru, Egypt, Ghana and South Korea. None from Eastern Europe, which may be material, and no women at all, which may be more material. As The Guardian wrote after Helen Clark announced her candidacy, her high-profile entry into the competition is certain to increase pressure among the power brokers of the UN to appoint a woman. But will it be that woman? Prime Minister of New Zealand for 9 years, head of the UN Development Programme since 2009, third ranked in the UN, the highest ranked woman in the UN. But this is a contest that will finally be determined by a small group of nations containing Russia, China and the US. There is much work to be done.
Well, in this contest, I think one will have to be very resilient. It will go for a number of months. Next week, the General Assembly will hold one-on-one informal hearings with candidates. But after that, there's no formal step in the process until July, when the Security Council does indicative ballots. When the current Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon was selected, it wasn't done till October of the selection year. So in between April and July, there'll be a lot of outreach. I'll be visiting capitals. I'll be calling on ambassadors. I'll be continuing with public engagement. There will be, I'm sure, many public events. I'm starting to get the invitations for those at the moment. So it's going to be a pretty intense time.
Incredibly intense. And the bizarre thing is about this process is there is a degree of transparency this time around. It appears that is unprecedented. There is a degree of democracy this time around that appears to be unprecedented. But in the end, it is the same old situation that the Security Council gets to vote, right?
Well, the Security Council traditionally has sent one name to the General Assembly, but you're right, John, that we've never seen a contest like this.
Incredible.
When Ban Ki-moon was selected, there was no Twitter in 2005. Facebook was in its infancy, so these ICTs, these technologies, didn't play a part in the campaign. This time, the General Assembly has been determined to have its say. Hence these informal hearings, which are really quite formal, being held next week. This has not happened before. So there's going to be a lot of voices in this. The Twitter sites are active. She for SG, One for 7 billion. There's a lot of campaigns out there, a lot of public interest. And I think a real awareness that the world faces serious challenges and people want to have a say about who this leader of the UN is going to be.
The world does face serious challenges, and one of the challenges, I guess, in the world, and I know this is going to be very hard for you to answer, is how on earth do we deal with Russia? And of course, there is this woman who is Director General of UNESCO, Irina Bokova of Bulgaria. The word on the grapevine, although who knows this, is that she is Russia's preferred candidate. Russia is a problem child for the UN. How do you overcome the politics within politics?
Well, firstly, as UNDP Administrator, I have established good and professional relationships with all the P5 members. That includes Russia. With Russia, UNDP signed a strategic partnership agreement, as we have with around 7 or 8 other G20 emerging economies. Russia has contributed money to UNDP programming on my watch in third countries for good and quality projects. So as UNDP administrator, I enjoy a good relationship with Russia. We are not a political agency, we're a development agency. We operate on that very, very professional basis. So I will be making an approach to Russia, as I will to the other permanent members, as I will to member states across the board, saying that I think the time has come for someone with the kinds of leadership and bringing people together, skills that I have to go into this job.
And if they say, yes, we agree with you, what is the thing you would most like to achieve?
So I think one of the most serious challenges we face is these terrible conflicts. They are not the kinds of conflicts, by and large, that the UN set out to resolve when it started. When Peter Fraser went to San Francisco and helped draft the charter, what was on the minds of the founding fathers was World War II and World War I. They did not want to see our world go through that again.
Yeah.
And it's probably to the credit of the UN in providing a forum for people talking out their differences. That didn't happen. So by and large, the conflicts are not between member states. I say by and large because I'm conscious that there's one in the Caucasus that has flared very recently with loss of life. By and large, the conflicts we're seeing are these horrible civil wars, these disparate non-state actors and militias, the violent extremists. Talking to our staff from Libya several weeks ago, they tell me that 41 different militias control Tripoli, the capital of Libya. This is conflict like we haven't seen before. So we need new tools, new approaches to deal with these very serious challenges to peace and security. And that immediately links us into the development agenda and how we can persuade countries, including donor countries, to make the long-term investments in building peaceful and inclusive societies, which will enable their people to get ahead. You can't get ahead if your country's mired in conflict.
Oh, that's the truth. How many interviews have you done today since your candidacy was announced? Any idea?
Well, I've lost track. John. Actually, the reaction up here of the UN media is they've been hungry for news about this campaign, and candidates haven't been saying a lot. Well, you know, I have been in public life a long time. I know if you put yourself out there, people want to hear from you.
Yeah, they do. But I think that the thing is, I'm sitting here listening to you is because I suspect I'm interview number, 30-something or what. I'm just guessing.
Just about.
Yeah,
just about.
Listen to the energy in your voice. Listen to the energy in your voice. You are totally up for this, aren't you?
I must be running on adrenaline. But look, I've worked all my life to have a reasonable shot at a position like this. I don't know whether it will be successful. What I do know is that I will give it everything I've got. The New Zealand government will give it everything it's got. And I have felt from the feedback from home that the stadium of 4 million is pretty much with me, and that's a fantastic feeling.
Helen Clark, whose hat is now very much in the ring. So what are her chances, given the tangled vagaries of the UN? It is very hard to say, but as head of the development program for the UN, Helen Clark has the advantage of knowing the organisation and being known by it. The Security Council report is an independent organisation which aims to advance the transparency and effectiveness of the Security Council. Its executive director is Ian Martin, who's served for the UN over 20 years, and he's worked in places like New York, Bosnia and Rwanda. He knows that organisation well from all points of view. Now, immediately after the announcement, and in fact before I spoke to Helen Clark, I asked him about the contest for the UN's top job.
There's been a lot of speculation. Of course, there's particularly been speculation about women candidates because there is a very strong lobby after 8 male Secretary-Generals to argue that now there should be a woman. On the other hand, there's also practice that doesn't go back throughout the 70 years of the UN, a more recent practice of regional rotation, and the Eastern Europe group at the UN has made the point that there's never been a Secretary-General from Eastern Europe, so they're arguing strongly that the next Secretary-General should be from that region, and 6 of the 8 candidates so far nominated are from Eastern Europe.
And are any of those candidates women? There are some females, aren't there, amongst that number?
Yes, 3 of them are women, 3 of them are men.
So they would seem on the face of it to have both gender and geography going in their favour.
Some people would argue that, but just as there are those who favour regional rotation, there are those who argue that it should be the best candidate irrespective of region. And the same arguments go on around the question of gender. I think most people by now would very much want to see women candidates strongly considered, but there are also those who say, in the end, it's the best candidate irrespective of gender. That decision will really just rest with how individual member states decide to cast their votes in the end. And that, of course, will only be the members of the Security Council, because although this year the process has been opened up and is quite unprecedented with hearings, meetings with candidates in the General Assembly next week, ultimately it's only members of the Security Council who will vote to make a recommendation, but then it's the General Assembly that has the final power of appointment.
Interestingly, New Zealand is on the Security Council at the moment. Does that matter? Will they have to recuse themselves, or are they able to fully participate?
There's nothing in the rules that says they can't participate fully, and indeed New Zealand will be holding the presidency in September, which could be an important month for the decision.
Ian, I know that you're not looking forward to me asking you this question at all, but does Helen Clark have any chance?
If anybody thinks they can answer that question, I wouldn't trust them, because I think the process this year is so much in uncharted territory that nobody really is able to make a prediction as to where things will end.
That's Ian Martin, the Executive Director of the UN Security Council report. It is 22 minutes past 5. Coming up next on Checkpoint, a New Zealand man has died of a heart attack in a Sydney detention centre. Fellow detainees are saying Rob Perehopper was involved in a vicious fight shortly before his death. Pressure mounts on the Prime Minister to strengthen the rules surrounding the country's controversial foreign trusts in light of the release of the Panama Papers. And Fisher & Paykel, as you've heard, announced the closure of its East Tamaki factory. 180 jobs will be lost, and CEO Stuart Broadhurst will join us just after the business news at 5:30. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, text 2101, or go to our Facebook site, Checkpoint RNZ, or tweet us, Checkpoint RNZ as well. There are reports that a New Zealand man who died in an Australian detention centre overnight was attacked by other detainees. Australian immigration says 42-year-old Rob Perehopper died from a heart attack at the Villawood detention centre, but sources claim he was involved in a fight shortly before his death. Mohammed Hassan reports.
Nation says Perehopper died from an apparent heart attack. His body was laid out for a few hours while other detainees got a chance to farewell him. A detainee, Vailua Langaya, says all of the New Zealand detainees knew him and performed a haka before he was taken away.
And just before they were going to load his body up, they gave us the opportunity just to, have a little farewell to him, and they also let us do a haka for him as they were taking his body away,
Langaya says Perehopper was visiting other New Zealand detainees at a neighbouring compound at the time, but everyone is tight-lipped about what happened. He says his death was a shock because he was a fit man who exercised regularly, but it could have been the stress.
It's not easy being in here, but it's, and now with this happening to one of the bros, it's like a lot of people are going to, start thinking, we don't want the same thing happening to anyone else,
Another detainee at the centre, Rawi O'Fowl, says it wasn't a heart attack that killed Perehopper.
If it was a heart attack, mate, why did he have a gash on his face and 2 black eyes? And they're only saying that. Serco's only saying it's a heart attack just so it doesn't look bad.
He says Serco staff and several detainees told him Perehopper was involved in a fight. Another former detainee told Checkpoint Pei Hopper was attacked and beaten before he died. Their claims are of course difficult to corroborate, but an advocacy group for detainees says it's not surprised. The founder of Iwi in Oz, Erina Moringa, says all kinds of people are lumped together in detention centres.
It's a melting pot of emotions, a melting pot of people with varying backgrounds. People aren't segregated like they are in prison. If you've got different types of offenders, they get segregated, don't they? Particularly sexual offenders. In a detention centre, they all just get jumbled up.
Ms. Moringa says Pei Hopper's family, who live in Sydney and visited him regularly, are in disbelief.
Speechless, inconsolable, unable to speak right now, in shock. The whole situation of being detained, waiting for a decision on your life, your family are doing time with you. They are also suffering.
Detainee Rawi O'Fowl says Pei Hopper has been his best friend for 25 years.
There's a gentleman. He was a staunch religious Christian, very staunch about his faith. He's a mate that you want,
He says Pei Hopper helped him get through the loss of his wife, who died from breast cancer last October while Fowl was in detention.
He's gone, so I've got to man up. He was someone to talk to and someone to tell you straight how it is. No bullshit. A straight shooter. He's a straight shooter, bro.
The Labour MP Calvin Davis says he's also heard reports of an altercation inside the detention centre, but he doesn't want to speculate whether that was the cause of death. He says it still raises questions about why Pei Hopper was still in detention.
There's the whole issue about why are these guys in the detention centre when they've already served their time in prison. They should be allowed to go home to their families, and then if their visas are revoked, they can be sent home, that's fine. But why do they have to be in detention centres?
Prime Minister John Campbell says he doesn't know what the conditions are inside Villawood Detention Centre, but says people should be careful not to make assumptions about what happened.
While I don't have a huge amount of information, I just caution people about jumping to conclusions about what caused the death. Certainly some of the claims that I've seen don't tally with the information I have at the moment, but the only way we can really get to the bottom of it is when we fully get the report back from the coroner.
The New South Wales coroner has begun investigations into the death of Pei Hopper, who now leaves behind a partner and 4 sons, one of whom is still in New Zealand. For Checkpoint, Mohammed Hassan.
We're going to talk to Calvin Davis about this in some depth after 6 o'clock and the broader situation concerning the so-called 501s who are still being held in detention in Australia. But let's return now to the breaking news that 180 staff are expected to lose their jobs after Fisher and Paykel Appliances announced its plans to close its East Tamaki factory. The company's CEO, Stuart Broadhurst, is on the line now. Are you there, Stuart? Stuart, are you there?
Good afternoon, John.
Thanks for joining us. Why does this factory have to close?
Well, we've been working with the staff at this factory for close to 8 years now, as we've tried to manage down falling demand. And I'd have to suggest that the people in the business have done a fantastic job in being flexible, got great commitment and loyalty from the staff. We've managed to starve off a closure now for many years, but the fact is that in the global market, we really need to make the decision now, difficult decision, and it is no longer sustainable and it has to be closed.
It's a reasonably unusual situation in that we spoke to Bill Newson from Etu, the union. I know you know Bill. And we spoke to him just after the news at 5 o'clock. And I don't think he's a world away from agreeing with you. I think he believes that that the company has worked hard with the union. The staff have worked tremendously hard. Everybody has worked hard. The factory's operating as a 4-day week, as a cost reduction exercise. That's right, isn't it?
That is right. No, it's an incredible story. The staff have been fantastic. We've done everything we can to get this to work. And again today, just a sad day and a real impact on the Fish and Paykel family.
So so you are now going to manufacture in Thailand and China, or are you already doing so?
We are already doing so. The product that are made in this plant is a small number of chest freezers and smaller refrigerators that have been made for some time. The market has moved. We need to upgrade those products, and the upgraded versions and the plant to make it is based in Thailand, and likewise we will be using our facilities outside of New Zealand to make that product and give us the scale needed to be competitive.
And also the labour costs needed. I mean, let's be frank about this. You need cheaper labour costs, do you?
Well, it's not only labour, it is the total cost of the product, and it is the fact we can't be competitive in New Zealand at these scales.
So the people you're competing against, who are your most direct competitors? If we walk into a big appliance store and we're potentially looking at F&P and we're comparing something else, who are you competing against?
We're on a push to be the number one global premium brand in appliances. So across the globe now, we're pushing the brand and investing in premium appliances.
So you're up against what? Smeg, Bosch, or whatever. Are they using
Bosch, Miele? Yes, they are.
And so are they manufacturing in labour now too? They're all European labels on the face of it, but are they manufacturing in labour too? Sorry, in Asia now too?
Absolutely. Most of Bosch's product will be coming out of China today.
Okay, and Smeg and Miele and the others all manufacturing in Asia?
It varies by manufacturer. It is mixed, and a number of Europeans are still making in Europe, as we do ourselves make in Italy.
Okay, so why can't you afford to keep East Tamaki open? I'm sorry, this has all been sprung on us, so this is a bit of an exploratory interview. I don't have your financials with me, but what was your profit last year?
We didn't make a profit.
Okay, so
we're investing heavily in growing the business. Every dollar we make goes back into growing and building resource into New Zealand to deliver growth for the business.
So when you say we will look to redeploy as many people as possible within the organisation, I know you would love to do that, but is that realistic? Is there any possibility of you being able to do that in serious numbers?
Over the last 12 months, we've employed another 272 people in New Zealand. And if you look at the type of roles, it is supporting the growth of the Fisher & Paykel brand in offshore markets. A lot of development resource, call centre, product support, digital support. And if I was honest, the roles that we are potentially going to make redundant in the plant are going to have a different skill set. So there is going to be an impact, and we will not be able to redeploy all of these people in our business. The upside is that we have spent a lot of time with this group. They have a great set of skills, they're committed, great attitude, and they will be the type of employee that people want to hire.
Stuart Broadhurst, who is the Fisher & Paykel Appliances CEO, thank you for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time. We did talk to the union after the 5 o'clock news too, and their version of events was not terribly far away from the company's, which is not always the case in these situations. Katrina standing by with the news headlines. After the news headlines, we've got business news. We're going to look at Panama, trusts, tax evasions, and the political reaction here. Some heat going on the Prime Minister today. He's batting it back. Not as much heat has gone on the Icelandic Prime Minister. We will look at that also. All of this, more on water, and a Republican congressman who's in New Zealand, and we ask him what he thinks of the TPP and what he thinks of Donald Trump. He likes one a lot more than the other. All of that is coming up before 6 o'clock, but here is Katrina with the RNZ headlines.
Fisher & Paykel Appliances has announced it's closing its East Tamaki factory with the loss of more than 180 jobs. The company says the factory is no longer sustainable due to a lack of scale and cost competitiveness. The manufacture of consumer whiteware and refrigeration products will be done in Thailand and China. The former Prime Minister Helen Clark is expecting an intense contest to become the next Secretary-General of the United Nations. After months of speculation, the government is formally nominating Ms Clark for the role. Helen Clark says she has the right experience to take over from Ban Ki-moon when he steps down at the end of the year. The government has been told it needs to strengthen the rules for New Zealand's foreign trusts. A massive leak of confidential documents has revealed how scores of the world's wealthy and political elite used a Panama law firm to set up tax havens, including in New Zealand. The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says New Zealand is gaining an international reputation as a tax haven, and the government needs to act to end the secrecy surrounding foreign trusts. The journalist Nicky Hager is taking further legal action against the police, accusing them of snooping on his travel arrangements. His lawyer says documents show that after an unlawful raid on Mr Hager's home in 2014, the police went to airlines to get information about his travel plans. Mr Hager is asking the High Court to hear this new claim together with other legal action that includes seeking damages. The Prime Minister John Campbell says people shouldn't jump to conclusions about how a New Zealand man died in an Australian detention centre overnight. A detainee at the centre says Rob Pehopa collapsed from a heart attack, but the Labour MP Kelvin Davis says he understands there was also some kind of fight just beforehand. Serco, which runs the centre, says there was no altercation. Those are the headlines. More news, sport and weather at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Jonathan Mitchell, who joins us from Wellington. Jonathan, this is very timely off the back of the announcement that 186 staff are to lose their jobs at F&P in East Tamaki because there's been a big fall, has there, in business confidence in what's regarded as a key survey.
That's right. Well, that came through, that negative sentiment certainly came through today in that quarterly survey of business opinion from NZIER. Certainly different to yesterday's data where the employees were feeling more chirpy when I was talking to you about that yesterday. But yeah, mainly that optimism or lack of it is coming through due to market volatility and expectations for a softer sales, certainly in the retail and service sector. And you could say the economy is as good as it gets with expectations for softer economic growth in the coming few months. One bright spark, though, was coming out of the building sector. They are feeling quite good at the moment with plenty of work penciled in the months ahead. But on the other side of the coin, you've got dairy continuing to come through. Those dairy regions are feeling the pain, and that came out of the quarterly survey of business opinion today. Manufacturers, yes, timely with this breaking news in the past hour or so. Fisher & Paykel cutting more than 180 jobs. Manufacturers are quite negative on their hiring intentions, and some expect to cut staff in the coming months. Fisher & Paykel today, for example. Also negatively coming through is the fact of rising costs. Businesses are saying they haven't been able to pass on cost increases. That's affecting their profitability. But they do say in the months ahead that they will pass on those costs to help to stay profitable. And when it comes to interest rates, the OCR, the NZIER, expects the official cash rate to drop to 2% by June. But, you know, off the back of this downbeat mood, you've got examples like Fisher & Paykel today. It could force the Reserve Bank's hand as soon as April, the end of this month, when it reviews the OCR.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, that's going to be fascinating, that review. Speaking of rates, Australia's reviewed theirs today. What did they do across the ditch, Jonathan? Yeah, no surprises there, John. Held it steady at 2%. Markets were penciling in no change virtually this week. But that higher Australian dollar, like New Zealand, the currency's up. The higher Australian dollar against the US could force the Reserve Bank of Australia's hand at some stage and lower it further. Financial markets are pricing in around a 1 in 3 chance of rates falling in Australia next month, and a 50% chance by August. And just running through into our market today, the NZX 50 index closed down 28 points, or that was just under 0.5% to 6716. The dollar is a bit weaker after that Australian announcement, trading at 67.89 US cents and 89.45 Australian. Jonathan Mitchell from Wellington, thank you very much indeed. Talk to you tomorrow night, Jonathan. Pressure is mounting on the Prime Minister to strengthen the rules surrounding the country's controversial foreign trusts. This follows a massive leak, of course, of confidential documents, not so confidential any longer, which reveal how scores of the world's wealthy and political elite used a Panama law firm to set up tax havens, including working in New Zealand. During question time at Parliament this afternoon, opposition parties took John Campbell to task over his assertion that New Zealand is not a tax haven. Our political reporter Benedict Collins has filed this report.
The New Zealand First Leader, Winston Peters, asked John Campbell how he could continue to argue the country is not a tax haven.
How can he stand by his statements yesterday that New Zealand, and I quote him, is not a tax haven, end of quotes, and that we, and I quote him again, also have an extensive disclosure regime, end of quotes, when specialist law firms on trust for foreigners point out there is no need for disclosure of identity or trust registration or for any such trust accounts to be audited.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Because I'm right.
The Labour leader, Andrew Little, wanted to know why the government hasn't acted on advice to strengthen the disclosure rules surrounding foreign trusts in order to protect New Zealand's reputation.
What effect does he think it has on New Zealand's reputation when we are viewed as a tax haven, harbouring billions of dollars, and his only reaction is to boast that it earns us $24 million a year in lawyers' fees and accountants' fees?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker,
Mr. Speaker, New Zealand is not a tax haven. Tax havens don't have the disclosure regimes that New Zealand have. But, Mr. Speaker, it's as simple as this. If it's such a bad idea, it was Labor in 1988 who passed the trust legislation. It was Labor in 2006 that had the disclosure.
Order.
And if it was a great idea to close...
Order.
Mr Key told Parliament that New Zealand requires the resident trustee running the foreign trust to keep detailed information about the trustor, its assets and beneficiaries, and says the Inland Revenue Department can access that information. The Green Party co-leader James Shaw attempted to table a new members' bill that would have seen the IRD publish many of these details, but was blocked by the government. He asked what anyone stood to lose from greater transparency.
So would the Prime Minister agree with me that for foreign trusts with nothing to hide, they should have nothing to fear from greater transparency?
Speaker, in the end, if a foreign trust is established in New Zealand, it's really important that they do understand that we have a full disclosure regime. It's for them to assess that. We are quite different from the sorts of places that are tax havens where they don't have disclosure regimes.
John Key says the government's not opposed to making changes to the foreign trust rules and continues to work with the OECD on this and similar issues. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
Well, as all of that goes on here, Iceland's Prime Minister is facing increasing pressure to resign following the release of those papers, which have now implicated 143 politicians. As far as anyone's aware, their families and close associates from around the world known to be using offshore tax havens. The data in this case has revealed Sigmundur Gunnlaugsson and his partner, who is now his wife, set up a company in 2007 in the British Virgin Islands through Mossack Fonseca. Mr. Gunnlaugsson then sold his half of the company to her for $1 on December 31st, 2009, just a day before a new law came into effect that would have required him as an MP to declare his ownership as a conflict of interest. $1. Our reporter Alex Ashton looks at a Prime Minister under fire there and the other world leaders under scrutiny.
More than 20,000 protesters took to the streets of Iceland's capital, Reykjavik, calling for Prime Minister Sigmundur Gunnlaugsson to resign. It follows revelations he and his wife have a stake in an offshore company based in the British Virgin Islands.
I'm just protesting like the rest of the nation, it appears.
I'm just protesting the corruption of the government, and that the Prime Minister has been hiding his money in Tortola and lying about it.
Iceland's opposition is planning a no-confidence vote later this week.
The extent of the situation was a total surprise. So that's why I'm here.
The allegations aren't new. In an interview with Swedish television last month, but broadcast only last weekend, Mr. Gunnlaugsson was asked if he and his wife owned assets held in a secret tax haven, with claims on Iceland's collapsed banks.
But you are indicating that I have not paid taxes on it.
No, I'm just asking you questions.
Okay.
The Panama Papers released at the weekend date back 4 decades and implicate politicians, public figures and the rich and famous around the world. Russian President Vladimir Putin's inner circle of friends is under scrutiny, as well as British Prime Minister David Cameron's father, after leaked data claimed he paid no UK duty for 30 years on a business he ran from the Bahamas. Iceland's Prime Minister walked out of his television interview after insisting his wife's tax records were in order and refusing to resign.
I have been willing to put the interests of the people of Iceland first, even when it's at a disadvantage to my own family.
The Australian Tax Office has confirmed it's investigating more than 800 wealthy clients of law firm Mossack Fonseca, the Panamanian law firm at the centre of the scandal. But in a phone interview with Reuters, its director Ramon Fonseca denied any wrongdoing, saying his company had fallen victim to a campaign against privacy. Mr. Fonseca said his company had set up more than 240,000 offshore companies for clients around the globe. He said the vast majority of the companies were legitimate. He says those that were being used for illegitimate activities weren't his company's responsibility.
Mire, señor Fonseca, y en las noticias que nosotros estábamos viendo, dice que les hackearon a ustedes el sistema de información.
Asked if he had confirmed his company's computer system had been hacked, he confirmed it had. White House spokesman Josh Earnest told media in light of the release of the Panama Papers The United States Department of Justice would determine whether there was evidence of corruption or other violations of US law.
I don't have a comment on the specific allegations that are included in those documents, but I can tell you that the United States continues to be a leading advocate for increased transparency in the international financial system and in working against illicit financial transactions and in fighting corruption.
For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
The time on Checkpoint, and in fact everywhere in New Zealand, is 6:45. Academics and environmental groups say putting a charge or tax on water use would force the resource to be better used and improve conservation outcomes. This has been much discussed at the moment. The government is reforming freshwater management at the moment, but is not considering a water charge, saying no one owns the water. Here's our environment reporter, Kate Gudsall.
Creating a charge or tax for water use has long been debated, and 4 reports down and the Land and Water Forum, formed to help bring resolution to freshwater management, has still not managed to reach consensus on the issue. Forest and Bird is part of the forum. Its advocacy manager, Kevin Hackwell, says other resources such as oil, gas or minerals all attract royalty payments, but not water. He says companies are making money out of a public resource, and if organisations pay for the litres of water used, they'll be more careful about how they use it.
You'll be much more efficient in your use, and that's something we don't see at the moment. The farmers, for example, will pay for resource consent to take the water, but they don't pay per litre for the water, and so have situations where there's not a market incentive for them to actually use it efficiently, and it's quite an irony, because you often get these people arguing market forces for all sorts of other parts of their business, but they actually don't believe in market forces when it comes to paying for the raw material, water.
Fish and Game pulled out of the forum because it didn't believe it was achieving its purpose. Its chief executive, Bryce Johnson, says a charge is worth exploring, but is adamant it shouldn't imply ownership of the water.
What is fundamentally wrong is that industry gets to use public water for free. All they pay is their own infrastructure cost of getting it to them and paying for the resource consenting. They pay no charge or no cost to the wider public, no rental to the wider public, and that's fundamentally wrong.
Both groups think a commercial charge is doable, but would not like to see the same thing levied on personal or recreational use of water. And academics also agree that a charge for water is worth considering. However, the director of the Waterways Centre for Freshwater Management, Jenny Webster-Brown, says a charge for water use based on a measure like volume applied to rural and urban water users would improve water management.
New Zealand has a reputation for being a very pluvial country, one in which water is not in short supply, and we tend to overuse it, possibly for that reason. And we need to value water more, and attaching a price to water encourages that type of behaviour.
An Otago University freshwater scientist, Mark Schellenberg, says currently water is managed in terms of how much water people are consented to take. He says putting a price on water would create a market, which would mean it would be regulated and should lead to a more efficient use of water. But he says that's not a panacea, and irrigation subsidies create problems.
So if you priced water and tried to set up a market to regulate the use, then people and uses that are subsidized have an unfair advantage. And so you don't really find necessarily the most efficient use of the water, even in terms of a profit or cost efficiency, because the subsidies distort the market.
Many members of the Land and Water Forum, such as Federated Farmers, are totally opposed to the idea of a charge. Its water spokesperson, Chris Allen, says farmers are efficient with their use of the resource and there's not enough water allocation for it to be wasted.
We only get enough for what we need as a bare minimum, and if we use it too much, too soon, later on in the season we won't have enough. Those are called seasonal limits, and most of Canterbury has those sorts of things, and most other regional councils are heading down that track anyway.
Business New Zealand's economist John Pask says it's an incredibly complex issue, but owners of existing resource consents may need to be compensated if a charge was introduced. And he says having an across-the-board price for water wouldn't work because New Zealand has regions with copious amounts of water and others with none. The Māori Council Chair, Manu Paul, says the government is wrong saying no one owns the water, and the Supreme Court found Māori have interests in the resource.
Every citizen should be able to have access to potable water for recreation, but any commercial operation will have to pay a fee. And that's the issue as far as the council is concerned, because these people are profiting from the use of a common good that belongs to Maori.
Public submissions on the government's freshwater reforms close later this month. For Checkpoint, Kate Gudsall.
10 minutes to 6. We turn now to the TPP, and amidst all the discussions about the controversial trade agreement signed up to by New Zealand, the US, Australia, Japan and 8 other Pacific Rim nations, there's still no certainty about whether it will be ratified by the US Congress. If it isn't, the deal as we know it collapses, full stop. So, will Congress vote for it? Well, one American politician on the record as a TPP supporter is the Republican congressman for Arizona, who's in New Zealand at present in his role as chair of the subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific. So, as a TPP fan, does Congressman Matt Salmon believe it will make it through Congress?
That's really debatable right now. Yes, I think ultimately it can be done. In an election year for president, almost impossible. I think that if it's going to happen the first part of next year. And I think that whoever gets elected president of the United States will make sure that they see that as a priority, whether it's 2 people that have actually come out opposed to it, our leading candidates, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, who I personally believe will both be supportive. When you're campaigning, it's one thing. Barack Obama campaigned against free trade when he ran for president. Now he's the biggest champion of TPP in Washington, D.C. Bill Clinton campaigned against free trade and then put through NAFTA and GATT and PNTR with China. So I wouldn't buy too much into the campaign rhetoric. I think that governing is very different. And I do believe that it is so important to the United States that it has to happen.
So you are not at all persuaded by both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, who are the front runners for the Democrats and the Republicans, saying no TPP under us. You think that will change should either of them become president?
I do. I really do. I think it's all just campaign rhetoric.
In terms of campaign rhetoric, the Washington Post had a headline recently saying, Rep Matt Salmon, which is you, I picked Rubio and then Cruz, but Trump over Clinton is a no-brainer. Is that a fair reflection of your position?
Yes, it is. I personally believe that while Donald Trump wasn't not my first pick, I haven't endorsed him yet. If he is our nominee, I will support him over Hillary Clinton.
You don't want to give us an exclusive here, do you? Do you want to endorse Donald Trump right now on Radio New Zealand's Checkpoint program?
Ain't going to happen.
Why not? Why Rubio, then Cruz before Trump?
I think that both of those candidates understand Washington politics, and I think that their commitment to the separation of powers, which to me is very, very important, is probably superior to Donald Trump. But you know, that we all pick a side in the primary, and then when our candidate doesn't win, we end up supporting the primary candidate. That's American politics.
Yeah, it is American politics. It's exhausting, though, isn't it, for people like you? I mean, the truth is, and you're far too diplomatic to say it, that you're really not a Trump fan at all, are you? But in the tribal world of American politics, if you're stuck with him, you're stuck with him.
Well, that's the way it goes. You know, you ride the horse that you you're thrust upon, and that's what we do. And listen, and it's not just because I'm a Republican, because I think Americans truly are sick of partisan politics. I think they're fed up with the Republican Party. They're fed up with the Democrat Party. That's why outsiders like Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders have done so well in this election. People are sick and tired of business as usual and Washington being out of touch with the rest of America. But you know, we'll come together again. We've gone through more difficult times than this in our nation's history, and we'll get through this too.
So when Trump talks about the wall between Mexico and the US, when he talks about a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States, when he comes out with those remarks which are widely described as misogyny about women, when he talks about punishing women who have abortions, do you cringe? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, when we went to Indonesia on this trip, one of the first questions was on the Muslim issue, Do you agree with Donald Trump's statement that, you know, America should ban Muslims? We pride ourselves with religious freedom. It is the First Amendment to our Constitution, the right to worship according to the beliefs of your heart without any kind of interference from the government. Some of the loudest voices against radical Islam are Muslim voices. One of them is in my state. He is Muslim, and he's been one of the strongest voices against radical Islam. He would, if Muslims were banned, he wouldn't be there. His name is Judy Jasser, and he's a regular on Fox News. So I think that some of the statements that are made, you know, I'm actually a big Megyn Kelly fan, and I think some of those statements were completely out of line. But listen, this is a really strange election year. It's more like reality TV than a political campaign, and we're just grabbing on and holding on for dear life.
It was a most unexpected interview, that one. The Republican congressman for Arizona, Matt Salmon. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's wife, Melania, has made a brief and rare campaign speech for her husband in Milwaukee ahead of the Wisconsin primary tomorrow. That's big, that primary. It comes as a new poll reveals 7 in 10 American women have had an unfavourable impression of Trump, but his wife describes him as a fair man who, quote, treats everyone equal.
He's a great leader. He's fair. As you may know by now, when you attack him, he will punch back 10 times harder. No matter who you are, a man or a woman, he treats everyone equal. He's a fighter, and if you elect him to be your president, he will fight for you and for our country. He will work for you and with you, and together we will make America strong and great again. Thank you.
Let's head back to New Zealand. Last week it was revealed that at least 24,000 workers have been shortchanged on their holiday pay since 2012. Some industry experts believe the number of people who have been left out of pocket is far greater. We've heard from them on this program. Today, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment held a meeting with payroll providers. None of those companies wanted to talk further, but the Labour Inspectorate also held a separate meeting with the Council of Trade Unions a short time ago. The president of the CTU, Richard Wagstaff, was at the meeting and is with us now out of Wellington. Welcome, Richard. Nice to have you on the program. What did the Labour Inspectorate tell you?
Well, they've been putting their heads together and thinking about long-term how to confront this problem, because the scale of it seems rather large. And they've rightfully assessed that there's a lot to be done in regards to the whole payroll profession, in regards to payroll companies, in regards to how the Holidays Act is interpreted and so on. And that was good, and they're doing that in a way that is commensurate with their resources, which isn't so good from our point of view. And we discussed with them how we think they need to work more effectively with the union movement, so we can combine our energies to root out this problem and identify the extent of it and rectify it, because by our reckoning there's a lot to be done on that score.
Richard, you say identify the extent of it. What do you think the extent of it is?
I think it's a lot more than 24,000. I don't want to put my money on it, but I think it's probably a lot bigger than what was first imagined. That doesn't mean thousands of people are owed thousands and thousands of dollars, but we do think there's probably been miscalculations. And you know, the clock's ticking on that. We need to get to the bottom of that as soon as we can, so we can put it right as soon as we can.
Richard,
and it's probably been going on for years.
Yeah, why? Why do you think this has happened?
I don't think it's because the Act's too difficult or there's been all these changes to it. In fact, we think the Act is basically the same as it's been for a long time. But what has changed, a couple of things. One is that people's work has become more irregular. We've got people on, you know, chopped and changed in their hours like we hear in the fast food industry. We've also got an IT industry that's come in, I think, and isn't looking good at the moment. And they've sold you know, programs and so on to employers that just don't work, and they really have to up their game, and I think this is a wake-up call for them because it's left them exposed and employers exposed.
Yeah, Richard, we're running out of time, and I don't think you'll hear the pips there, but very quickly, how long do you think it will be before we know the full extent of it and begin to really solve this issue?
Months, I would say it will take, but we're onto it.
Okay, Richard Wagstaff, the President of the CTU. Thanks very much indeed for joining us this evening, Richard. We appreciate it. Lots of feedback coming in, by the way, for people supporting Helen Clark. It seems to be completely across the political spectrum, which wasn't obviously the case when she was Prime Minister, as is the case with any leader. But Mark sums it up. I vote for Helen Clark. She is a good leader, ideal for such an important and responsible position. And another listener says, very proud as a Kiwi to share in Helen Clark's quest. Kia ora everyone, you are listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National, where the pips reign supreme. The time is 6 o'clock. It's lovely to have you with us, however you're doing so. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget, you can obviously listen to us on the radio, as most of you are, but you can also watch us on Preview Channel 50 and live streaming on the RNZ website. In the next 30 minutes, the speculation is over. As you know, Helen Clark formally joins the fray for the top UN job. We look at that from some other perspectives. The Crown admits it played a part in the decline of the Māori language. That story's coming up, and the online scam that cons people into taking photos of their hands and feet. All of that, and I think Kelvin Davis on the situation with the 501s. We hope he's going to join us after 6 o'clock. But before any of that, Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Fisher & Paykel Appliances is to close its East Tamaki factory in Auckland with the loss of more than 180 jobs. The whiteware maker says in order for it to remain globally competitive, it needs to shift more of its work to Thailand and China. The chief executive, Stuart Broadhurst, has told Checkpoint the company will maintain a firm foothold in New Zealand.
The business is already offshore. We are a New Zealand-based business that runs a global business. About 18% of our sales are in New Zealand. Most of the businesses run from New Zealand. About 28% of our staff are based in New Zealand, and a lot of the development of the product, the market, and the support for the product is all done out of New Zealand as we grow in other parts of the world.
Stuart Broadhurst says the closure will mark the end of the production of complete appliances in New Zealand. The former Prime Minister Helen Clark is expecting a wide-open but intense contest to become the next Secretary-General of the United Nations. Ms Clark is one of 8 candidates vying to replace Ban Ki-moon when he steps down this year. Her nomination comes nearly a week before candidates are scheduled for their first set of interviews with the UN General Assembly. Helen Clark says before she appears before the General Assembly, she has to submit a vision statement.
Obviously, I'm putting a lot of thought into the vision statement. I have drafted it and I'm redrafting it. But at the headline level, what I can say is this. I have 3 main priorities. One is to ensure that the UN's efforts on peace and security are relevant to our times.
Helen Clark expects more nominees to be put forward in the coming days. The Prime Minister John Key has been told he needs to strengthen the rules surrounding New Zealand's foreign trusts. A massive leak of confidential documents has revealed how scores of the world's wealthy and political elite used a Panama law firm to set up tax havens, including in New Zealand. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says specialist law firms and foreign trust providers advise clients there's no need for disclosure of identity in New Zealand and no chance of their trust being audited. Mr Peters says New Zealand is gaining an international reputation as a tax haven, and John Key needs to act to end the secrecy surrounding foreign trusts. However, Mr Key says the resident trustee running the foreign trust is required to keep detailed information about the trust, its assets and beneficiaries. He says the Inland Revenue Department can access that information. From Parliament, Benedict Collins.
A detainee at the Villawood Detention Centre in Sydney claims a New Zealander who died there overnight was attacked by other inmates. Australian Immigration says Rob Pehopa died of a suspected heart attack, but another detainee, Rawi Ofau, says he's been told there was a fight. Val says it wasn't a heart attack that killed his friend.
If it was a heart attack, mate, why did he have a gash on his face and 2 black eyes? And they're only saying that. Sirko's only saying it's a heart attack just so it doesn't look bad.
Rawi Fal, a detainee at the Villawood Detention Centre in Sydney. Sirko, which runs the centre, says there was no fight. The Green Party says the Crown should apologise to all Māori for its historic actions, which almost led to the loss of the Māori language. Changes due to be made to legislation this evening will acknowledge for the first time nationally that the Crown has contributed to the decline in Māori language. The Green Party's Māori development spokesperson, Marama Davidson, says an acknowledgement is good, but an apology would be better.
The effect was that it affected all Māori nationwide. So it would be a really good sign of honouring the treaty relationships for the Crown to be able to make a nationwide overarching apology.
The Green Party MP, Marama Davidson. The journalist Nicky Hager is taking further legal action against the police, accusing them of snooping on his travel arrangements. His lawyer Felix Geiringer says newly released documents show that after the unlawful raid on Mr Hager's home in 2014, the police went to airlines to get information on his travel plans in the hope of tracking down his sources.
They did it all again without telling the people they got the production orders off that they were seeking to go behind journalistic privilege and all the issues that the High Court found were wanting in relation to the raid on the house. And then they unlawfully tried to withhold these documents from Nicky when he made a Privacy Act request.
Felix Geiringer says if the police can go to third parties like this, it will make it very hard for journalists to promise to keep their sources confidential. Mr Hager is asking the High Court to hear this new claim together with other legal action that includes seeking damages. The police say they won't comment while it's before the courts. In sport, the Warriors hooker Thomas Luluai will make his long-awaited National Rugby League return after a 10-month layoff due to an ACL injury. Luluai has been included on the bench for Saturday's match against the Manly Sea Eagles. Meanwhile, the Canterbury Bulldogs second rower Sean Lane is joining the New Zealand Warriors in exchange for Raymond Faitala Mariner. Both players who were off contract with their clubs at the end of the season will change clubs immediately. And the St George Illawarra halfback Benji Marshall insists his NRL career isn't coming to an end, despite struggling to find a club for next season. The 31-year-old former Kiwis captain has been offered $300,000 to stay with the Dragons, but so far he's turned down the offer. He is instead focused on getting the Dragons back on track after a 36-0 thrashing by North Queensland.
Definitely not thinking about it. Maybe in about 3 or 4 weeks might start, but at the moment my job's to try and get the team on the right track and lead them around the field, and if I start worrying about that, lose track of where I'm at, so just letting it go at the moment.
But you do want to play next year?
I'll be playing next year, yeah. I'm not doubtful of that, but just don't know where yet.
Benji Marshall. The Highlanders have suffered a setback in their quest to win back-to-back Super Rugby titles, with prop Brendan Edmonds ruled out for the rest of the season with a knee injury. Edmonds ruptured ligaments in his left knee in his side's win over the Western Force at the weekend and will require reconstructive surgery. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the odyssey of Jesse Carson, who took his family to Sri Lanka to meet the child they were sponsoring. They overcame the language barrier with Lego. There's a window on the world of South Korea, which the BBC describes as a silent cultural superpower. They obviously haven't listened to any K-pop, and our philosopher Anne Kerwin argues her profession has a future, even if neuroscience does unlock the secrets of the mind. On Nights from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula mostly fine, isolated showers in the east, clearing overnight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers gradually easing tomorrow and clearing in the evening. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country, also Wairarapa, Nelson and Marlborough. Fine weather, isolated afternoon showers about the ranges of Nelson and Marlborough today. Bulla and Westland fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow and drizzle developing later. Fiordland and Stewart Island, scattered showers turning to rain tomorrow evening with heavy falls possible. Canterbury, Otago and Southland fine with high cloud. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, isolated showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 6.
Thank you, Katrina. It's the big story of today, really. The former Prime Minister Helen Clark becoming the 8th candidate in the contest to become the next Secretary-General of the UN. Ms Clark is the second Western candidate and the 4th woman to enter the race. Smart money. Although, boy, reading the tea leaves at the UN is never easy as picking. It will be a woman next time round. Obviously, there has never been one. The New Zealand government has formally submitted her nomination letter to the presidents of the UN General Assembly and the UN Security Council. Don't forget, the Security Council will decide it. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
Helen Clark's bid to become the 9th UN Secretary-General and first woman to hold the post comes barely a week before candidates are scheduled for their first set of interviews with the UN General Assembly. Ms Clark expects the next few months of campaigning to be very intense.
Before I appear at the General Assembly hearing next week, I will submit a vision statement. And obviously I'm putting a lot of thought into the vision statement. I have drafted it and I'm redrafting it. But at the headline level, what I can say is this. I have 3 main priorities. One is to ensure that the UN's efforts on peace and security are relevant to our times.
The Prime Minister, John Campbell, says he's already started to talk up Ms Clark as the next Secretary-General to foreign leaders.
Well, I raised the issue with, serious leaders, obviously, when I was in New York last week. I wasn't trying to put them on the spot. I was simply trying to make sure that they were aware that an announcement would be made. What I can tell you is we didn't get any adverse reaction, so there was nobody that either said to me that they didn't think she was hugely capable or immediately said to us, look, that would be an issue.
The Labour leader Andrew Little is also planning to play his part.
When I visited New York at the end of last year and visited the UN, certainly everybody I met with spoke very highly of her, and naturally I did too. So any opportunity I have, I don't have many international engagements as leader of the opposition or many scheduled this year, but opportunities I get, then I will certainly be talking up Helen.
A former New Zealand permanent representative to the United Nations says it will be crucial for Helen Clark to win the support of the 5 permanent UN Security Council members in her bid for the top UN job. Michael Powles, who was at the UN from 1996 to 2001, says any of those nations, China, Russia, Britain, France or the United States, could veto a nominee.
Each of whom has to support the candidate. And then it will go to the General Assembly, and the General Assembly will endorse the appointment. So it's not too complicated a procedure, but what is extremely complicated is really the kind of dark workings that go on in the background.
Helen Clark is seen as the favoured candidate of Britain, France and the US. But others are pushing for an Eastern European to replace current Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon. Russia has said the next UN chief should come from that region, the only one that has yet to be represented in the top job. Helen Clark is already up against 6 candidates from the Balkans, including Moldova's former foreign minister and diplomat, Natalia German. And Ms Clark says she expects even more candidates to be put forward in the coming days.
So it is an open contest, and that's what brings us back to what are the skills for the job and who has the skills for that job. I think in the world of crisis and challenges that we live in, that has to be the paramount consideration.
If successful, Ms Clark would be the 4th Secretary-General to come from the Western Europe and Others UN regional group, but the first from outside Europe. Ban Ki-moon's term finishes at the end of December, with the selection process beginning by the end of July. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.
Let's stay with our excellent gallery team. The Crown is to acknowledge nationally for the first time that it contributed to the decline in Māori language in New Zealand. The Māori Development Minister, Te Ururoa Flavel, will make an amendment to the Māori Language Bill tonight, but says the change is not an attempt to address all historic grievances around Te Reo Māori. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Te Ururoa Flavel says he hopes the statement goes some way to acknowledging the pain and loss suffered as a result of successive Crown policies that have denied and suppressed his people's right to use te reo Māori. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, says the change is a recognition that the Crown has a legal obligation to preserve the language. He says language in the amendment mirrors other bills where the Crown apologised for its past actions.
We have effectively recognised the shortfall from the Crown in terms of preservation of the language. So some people will say it's an apology. I would just say it is consistent with what we've historically always done.
The Green Party's Māori development spokesperson, Marama Davidson, says an acknowledgement is good, but an apology would be better.
I've talked often about my grandmother who was beaten in school. Her reo was beaten out of her. That, in effect, negated te reo for the following 3 generations of us, all from beating of one person. So there's definitely an acknowledgement. I'm happy that that's going to be in the bill. An apology is long overdue.
Labour's Māori development spokesperson Kelvin Davis says his party had already drafted an apology to include in the bill, but he thinks the acknowledgement has come about as Tūrurua Flavel came under pressure to include something along those lines in the Māori language bill. He says te reo Māori is a taonga which was almost completely lost.
Both my grandparents were fluent Māori speakers. In fact, I'm told my grandmother's Māori was better than her English, and yet their 5 sons can't string a word together. So they were the forgotten or the missing generation in terms of te reo acquisition.
The committee stages of the bill are due to be debated this evening, which is when the amendment will be added. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Chris Bramwell.
6:15 is the time. NetSafe has received around a dozen complaints about an online scam that cons people into taking photos of their hands and feet for an art project in exchange for money they never see. NetSafe says in reality it's likely the photos are being used for a niche fetish website. Our reporter Maya Bari begins her report with students who've been targeted.
She wanted 5 different models, and she said that she'd later on send me a list of positions that she wanted the hands and feet to be in, and she wanted some videos as well.
So at first they were just asking hands on the table, palms up, palms down, same with your feet and soles of your feet and your toes, just pictures of basically your hands and your feet. And then it started turning into, she started asking for little 5-second videos of your hand spreading your fingers and clenching into a fist, that sort of thing.
Started getting a bit weird, and I started getting suspicious because she was like, this one, we need you to get supplies. She asked me to get oil, gloves, stockings.
These university students told RNZ News they were asked to send photos of their hands and feet for as much as $6,000. A spokesperson for NetSafe, Chris Hales, says people are generally being contacted by a third party after completing work on job-seeking websites such as Student Job Search. He says the scammer is then getting in contact by email, offering them a unique job opportunity. Mr Hales says since 2013, NetSafe has received just under a dozen reports of the scam and believes it's likely the reports are linked.
It matches up with a series of reports from last year as well, late last year, where somebody found that the photos that they'd sent to somebody not been paid for, but had also ended up on a fetish website. So it's a little bit of a difficult situation where you think you're doing a job and then you find that your images that you've created are being used for other purposes.
Chris Hales says students are probably being targeted because they're vulnerable and need the money, but says the scam has spread over a number of job advertising websites. A spokesperson for Student Job Search, Chris Carston, says he's only aware of one incident, but encourages students with concerns to come forward.
It's wider than Student Job Search. I think the issue with online is the fact that these third-party arrangements occurred, and what we can do is advise students to take a very cautious approach and not be involved beyond anything that they'd agreed to in regards to the original job on our website.
TradeMe's John Duffy said it was made aware of the scam yesterday and has since identified a suspicious listing that was on the site over the new year.
We were able to identify that listing and that membership as most likely being part of the same group. As of this morning, we've emailed all the people who got in touch through that listing with the advertiser to warn them that it could be part of the same scam.
Chris Hales of NetSafe says the scam results in financial loss for the victims, but also causes significant emotional harm.
It may not be graphical pictures of your own body or other people, but I think it's the fact that you've been deceived and tricked into sending images which later end up on a sort of a niche interest, a fetish website that can be really quite concerning.
Chris Hale says NetSafe is passing along any reports of the scam to the police. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
18 and a half minutes past 6. We've looked at the story earlier in the program, but we're hoping to find out more about what's going on here now. Reports that a New Zealand man who died in an Australian detention centre overnight was attacked by other detainees. No official confirmation of this, we hasten to add. Australian immigration says 42-year-old Rob Perhopper died from a heart attack at the Villawood Detention Centre, but sources claim he was involved in a fight shortly before his death. And if you heard the report before 6 o'clock, you would have heard from people who'd seen him and said he had black eyes. Labor MP Kelvin Davis says he's also heard reports of an altercation inside the detention centre, and he joins us now live. Kelvin, are you there?
Yeah, kia ora, John.
Kia ora. I suspect we have the same sources, RNZ and you, but what have you heard from inside the Villawood Detention Centre?
Look, yeah, I heard there was an altercation, and I don't know whether it was verbal or physical or what happened, but shortly afterwards, Mr. Perhopper passed away. Really, I can't speculate on the cause of death, but look, I'd say that the whole situation that these people are under is very stressful, being separated from family and friends and everything, and you know, would contribute to the whole situation.
Well, what details do you have? What details does New Zealand have on how many now of these 501 detainees? So this is the Section 501, which means that they're failing on character grounds, that they have criminal histories, that they're being sent back to New Zealand. Although in the case of Kohapu, for example, there was no criminal history. They just didn't like him. How many New Zealanders are there in this position in Australia, Kelvin? Have you any idea?
Well, I was talking to people who are on the Route 501 Hikoi around Australia, and they say that they believe the numbers are being severely underreported. I think Australia was saying there were a couple of, maybe 300 or 400, and yet they said in a detention centre north of Perth, there are a couple of hundred there. On Christmas Island, we know there's 150. There'll be more in Villawood. There's more around. So I think the numbers, we're not really getting a true picture of the actual numbers of New Zealanders.
And why not? Because this is official information. It shouldn't be so hard to find this out, should it?
Well, you'd think that the New Zealand government and Foreign Affairs would actually have a good idea of how many New Zealanders were detained in Australia. It's almost beyond belief that Foreign Affairs have done next to nothing in regard to this whole situation. When I wrote to the Prime Minister last year asking how many or whether Foreign Affairs were going in and checking on the well-being of these New Zealand citizens, he just couldn't be bothered replying. Look, to me, the government has just been totally slack at this, and it's just wrong on every account. These people should be at home with their families, hopefully working, rather than being slept in a detention centre. And if at the end of the process their visas are declined, well, fair enough, send them back. But there's just no logical reason for them to be there in a detention centre while that's going on.
This has been dragging on for months, of course, now, and as you say, they are being held in detention centres. Kohapu was being held in Kasarina prison, which is the maximum security prison in Western Australia. Some of them have served their time and were out of prison. A few of them have never been charged with anything at all. Others were still serving their time. What is the end game here? How does this finish?
Well, really, Australia has to take a good hard look at itself and change their stupid law. That's really the only way it could end. These people if they've served their time, they're no longer prisoners. They should be free people, but they're now detainees. Some of them have probably been in detention, or some of them definitely have been in detention longer than they were actually in prison for their original crime. So it's double jeopardy, and it's just wrong. I had a look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I believe in the first dozen or so articles, Australia, in my opinion, is breaking about 4 or 5 of those articles. It's just absolutely wrong and stupid. It's a waste of Australian taxpayers' money. I mean, okay, they can spend their tax money how they want, but to me, this is just a total waste of money. The law was designed to target terrorists. These people aren't terrorists. They're not going to pose a danger out in the community. They should be with their families while their visa situation is being determined, their character tests sorted out. And look what's happened now. We've got some guy who's passed away in a detention centre when he could have spent the last 10 months of his life with his family.
Kelvin Davis, Labor MP, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We should stress that Kelvin Davis has worked with many of these people and did go up to Christmas Island to look at the situation up there. There has been very little contact, as far as we're aware, between the New Zealand government and the Australian government to try and clarify details like how many New Zealanders are being detained under this Section 501. Some tragic news just in. Police are investigating a fatal crash after a toddler was hit by a vehicle in Otara in Auckland this evening. The 18-month-old was taken to a medical centre by family at around 5 p.m. However, he passed away shortly after. The county's Manukau Serious Crash Unit is investigating and is still trying to establish the circumstances surrounding the incident. The driver of the vehicle is assisting police with their inquiries. The family of the boy is being supported by police and victim support. That is an 18-month-old toddler. The time on Checkpoint is 24 minutes past 6. Coming up in 5.5 minutes on World Watch with Elizabeth Brown tonight. I think Elizabeth Brown. No, I did see John Greaves around. It's very much with John Greaves. More revelations from the so-called Panama Papers today involving the leaders of Pakistan and China, and a third day of fighting between forces from Azerbaijan and separatists. This is becoming very nasty indeed, this situation. More details in 5 minutes and 6 seconds. Ngāpuhi is New Zealand's largest iwi, and when they finally settle their treaty claim, it will almost certainly be New Zealand's largest treaty settlement ever, far larger than Tainui and Ngaitahu, those big settlements in the 90s. The Crown acknowledges this, but Ngāpuhi has been beset by dispute and difficulties over negotiation. Now a new report is pushing for the Northland-based iwi to change the way it's negotiating, but already Hone Sadler, the chair of the negotiating body, Tū Horonuku, has dismissed the recommendations. Te Mano Korehi journalist Lee Marama McLaughlin reports.
A working party which included members of Tū Horonuku and its opposition, Hapu Alliance Te Kotahitanga, has come up with a set of recommendations aimed at breaking the impasse which has held up negotiations for several years. The co-chair of Te Kotahitanga, Pera Tipene, says a united plan has been reached on how to negotiate with the government.
The biggest change is that the foundations of the settlement model are firmly in the hands of Hapu, and it's really, really positive to hear that there is a sense of unity amongst that core group that's now emanating out into Ngāpuhi.
But the chair of Tū Horonuku, Hone Sadler, wasn't on the working party and says he doesn't agree with its plans.
In terms of a Hapu involvement or Hapu driven, with Tū Horonuku they already have that, because there are 15 members on that board who are Hapu, of a board of 22. They might say, well, what's the difference?
The report was instigated late last year after the Waitangi Tribunal found flaws in how Tū Horonuku was representing Hapu. Under the new proposals, representative roles for Kuia and Kaumatua, Te Runanga Aiwi o Ngāpuhi and urban Māori will be scrapped. But Mr Sadler says the Hapu voice comes at the expense of Ngāpuhi whānau who live in the city.
Majority of Ngāpuhi are urban dwellers, which silences their voice. And although the argument is that Hapu can represent them, no, Hapu can't represent them. Some of them are displaced.
The Working Party is calling for feedback by the end of the month before giving the final report to the Crown. The Minister for Treaty Negotiations, Chris Finlayson, wouldn't comment on the report while it's in its draft form, but encourages Ngāpuhi to give it a read. And Te Tai Tokero MP Kelvin Davis agrees.
There's still people at some of the meetings that they were holding around throughout Ngāpuhi. Some people still entrenched that they didn't want anything to do with the other side. They weren't prepared to compromise at all. You know, that's really just getting us nowhere, especially when it's something like $1 million a month is being lost in interest alone.
If the report is backed up by Ngāpuhi members, there'll be a name change for Tū Horonuku, something fresh to mark a new phase of negotiating that the iwi hopes will see it settle its claims sooner rather than later. For Checkpoint, ko Lee Marama McLaughlin tēnei.
28 minutes past 6. Greece has deported the first group of refugees back to Turkey as a landmark EU deal to stop the influx of refugees into Europe kicks in. This report to end the programme tonight from Reuters.
A boat arrives on the horizon in Turkey from the Greek island Lesbos.
On board, the first group of migrants being returned under a landmark EU deal that went into effect on Monday, April 4th. Around 130 migrants were bussed to the Greek port at daybreak, where they boarded 2 ships to take them back to Turkey. Under the plan, Ankara will take back all migrants and refugees, including Syrians who entered Greece illegally after March 20th. Monday's migrants were primarily from Bangladesh and Pakistan and had not applied for asylum. Eva Moncure is the spokesperson for the EU border agency Frontex.
So the procedure was very calm. Everything was very orderly. Migrants were put on buses. And when the buses were ready, the buses came here to the harbor.
For accepting the returned migrants and refugees, the EU will reward Turkey with more money, early visa-free travel, and has promised to take in thousands of Syrians. The uncontrollable influx of people fleeing war has put a massive strain on Europe, with more than 1 million people making their way through Greece in 2015. But the plan's success is uncertain. Even as the first deportations were underway Monday, a Turkish Coast Guard intercepted dozens of people trying to get to Lesbos.
That report from Reuters just before we go tonight. Peggy from Kandala says, John, I was impressed by Helen Clark's nuanced perspectives on Russia. I fully support her candidacy for the SG position. Her chances of success will be greater if our government gets off its diplomatic high horse and adopts a similarly nuanced stance towards Russia. Gosh, nuance in Russia. That's Checkpoint for tonight.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Fisher & Paykel Appliances says the company will maintain a firm foothold in New Zealand despite closing its East Tamaki factory and shedding 180 jobs. A detainee at an Australian detention centre claims a New Zealander who died there overnight was attacked by other inmates. The former Prime Minister Helen Clark says she has the right experience to become the next United Nations Secretary-General. And pressure is mounting on the Prime Minister to strengthen the rules for the country's foreign trusts. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Coming up tonight, more national leaders under the spotlight in the wake of the Panama Papers. Helen Clark announces her candidacy